All right. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wassalatu wassalam ala ashraf al-anbiya'i wal mursaleen. Sayyidina wa nabiyyana wa maulana Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Alhamdulillah, welcome everyone to this event where we're going to be talking about admissions in admission trends that are unique to this particular cycle, the 2023-2024 cycle. And inshallah, we will also be opening up the second half for Q&A. So without further ado, Dina, would you mind just sharing every now and again the slides as people come in? I'm going to be sharing my screen in a moment with the slides that you have access to. And let's go to the top. Bismillah. Okay. Now, why is this? Oh, I see. I'm in the wrong. Sorry. Little tech snafu as always. All right. Bismillah. So current emissions trends and early application Q&A. So I always like to start just with a conscious bismillah, or just remembering our purpose. Obviously, this is a time of immense distress in the ummah. Our brothers in Palestine are undergoing unimaginable trauma as we're sitting in our comfortable homes, thinking about college and so on. And it's very important to give shukr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for all his blessings, but also for our hearts to ache and for our Muslim brothers who are suffering. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ease their suffering. So bismillah. So I would love it if you could type in the chat and select it for everyone so everyone can see just your name, whether you're a parent or a student, or something else maybe, and then your grade level, just so we can get a sense of who's here. So mashallah, 4th grade student. I guess you don't really need to put your name because your name is already there. So maybe just here, whether you're a student, a parent, and your grade level. Inshallah. So there's only 3 people in the meeting, 4 people. I think there are more than that. Ali and so on. What about some of the other people that I don't necessarily know as well? I see a lot of my own students here, but I know there are a lot of other people here. It's always good to know so that I tailor the talks. If I see that almost everyone's a student, obviously, the sorts of things we talk about might be a little bit different. Okay, yeah, now I'm seeing everything, mashallah. Thank you so much for everyone. Okay, so in terms of me, I think many of you probably know me. My name's Brother Hamzah Henshaw. I'm the founder of Phi Before College, and this is a company that I founded to help Muslim teenagers navigate the college application process. And really, it's called Phi Before College because the idea is that process starts well before our 12th grade year, even though what we're talking about today is particularly relevant for seniors and juniors. My philosophy around college placement is it starts much earlier. If you have a really good middle school and beginning of your high school years, then everything becomes easier. When you're filling in these applications and you get to your activities section and you're trying to tell your story and your essay, you have a lot of fodder, you have a lot of things to choose from when you do really well with that. So that's a big focus of the company. But today we're really focusing on this deadline, which is coming up 1 week from today. And so inshallah, we'll go on from there. Bismillah. All right, so the first trend which we wanted to talk about is the Supreme Court. SCOTUS is the Supreme Court of the United States, and the affirmative action decision. So this was obviously big news that came out last June or so. The conservative court overturned the precedent which allowed affirmative action. So essentially what affirmative action did was it made it permissible for race to be considered as a factor in admissions. And so in practice, what this meant was that when students from an underrepresented race or a race that had historically not had as many people in college, when they applied for college, it gave them, at colleges that had affirmative action, somewhat of a boost to their application and so on. So essentially, being a African American student or being a Pacific Islander or some other sort of less common ethnicity, this was, or less common race, not ethnicity. This gave somewhat of a boost. And this is something that the University of California did away with a long time ago. More than 20 years ago, they got rid of race-conscious admissions, and it did have an impact. The number of Black students has gone down in the U of C schools, and the number of Asian students in particular has increased pretty significantly. So it's somewhat of an unknown how it will play out now that it's been it's not allowed everywhere. But there is there is an exception to this. In John Roberts' ruling, he did mention that race can be discussed in the context of inside of your admissions essays, and you can talk in your essays and your supplements about your racial background and your cultural identity and so on, and that is something that admissions officers can take in to account. So when you check your race box on the Common App, that will be blacked out. Colleges will not be able to see which box you chose, but when you write your essay and you share your background, then they are able to see that, and they are still committed to enrolling a diverse class. So how does this impact Muslims? So for one thing, for Muslims, especially those, if you were from, Sudan or Somalia, and you typically were, in the African American group and did get that, that benefit or whatever you want to call it from affirmative action, that's no longer the case. So you need to make sure, that you are able to talk about your background at some point. The other thing that's important to note is that Muslim is obviously not a race. It is, a religious background, and that is not something that the Supreme Court was really talking about. It was really talking about race in particular. However, the increased focus on diversity and really reading through the lines of the essays and trying to do this, I think will have a net positive effect for Muslims. Because admissions officers are really, their spidey senses are on, high alert, looking for diverse applicants this year. And so when a really interesting Muslim applicant who's able to share their background in a compelling way comes through, I think, that will be a net positive. Obviously, this is all, this is the first cycle we're going through with this, so there'll be much more that we know after the data comes in, but these are the speculations that I imagine that I'm hearing from other counselors that I know. How does this change our strategy? For one thing, in the personal essays, whether it's your personal statement or the supplemental essays, you certainly do not have to talk about your race. And for some people, they feel very frustrated that Atlantic article that you see linked over there, the Supreme Court killed the college admissions essay. It's saying that all sorts of students are, who otherwise would not have talked about their race are going to feel compelled to do so, and it's going to water those discussions down and lead them into sort of areas of cliche and just, very predictable tropes around race and so on. There's certainly a danger of that, and you definitely don't want to write about it in a way that's predictable or not really authentic. At the same time, there's more need than ever to make sure that you do talk about your diversity at some point in your application, even if it's very subtle. You don't need to hit people over the head with it. But you can talk about my mother's Arabic accent, echoed through the halls, or something like that, where you're just sort of hinting at it without going too hard. But some people will be, writing essays that are much more direct about that. So yeah, just beware of just trotting out the same sort of examples and things that people have probably heard before, right? So for example, around wearing hijab, obviously that's a huge decision that many sisters have taken, but try to find an angle if you're writing an essay that's talking about the hijab, that maybe you're framing it in a way that's not very, very common. And so on. There's some great resources here. The College Essay Guy has a lot of wonderful resources about this, which again you have access to from the link that Dina's been sharing in the chat. And there's also a wonderful podcast episode and so on if you're interested in learning more. All right. The second change is the change to the FAFSA. So FAFSA is the Federal Application for Student Aid. So this is sort of one of the core financial aid forms. It's the only form required by public universities and by many sort of mid to lower tier universities. The FAFSA is the only financial aid form that they use. There was some legislation passed, I think, in 2021 that was going to simplify the FAFSA. So it was taking it from something like 92 questions down to 46 questions. I might have the numbers a little bit wrong, but something to that effect. So it's cutting the time down that's needed to fill in the FAFSA. They've also made it easier to pull your financial data from your taxes. It used to be that only some students were able to do that. Now, apparently, they've changed the permissions and so on. And so almost everyone should be able to pull their data directly in, from their tax forms. So those are maybe positive things: shorter form, easier to fill in. The issues with it is that there's less data collected, right? So depending on people's financial situation, obviously, our financial situations tend to be fairly complicated, and some people, have a high income, but they have lots of dependents on them. They're sending lots of money back home. They might have a child with special needs. Some people have a relatively low income, but then they have lots of family money or other things. And so essentially, the fewer the questions, the less detail that schools are able to get into your finances and really understand your situation. The other thing is that the FAFSA has been delayed. Typically, the FAFSA is released in October 1st. This year, they're saying sometime in December, so hopefully December 1st and so on. But this delay has an impact on the financial aid for this early application round. And we're going to be talking about that in some other places. But because you're not able to actually fill in this form till well after you've submitted your early applications, it makes things a little more complicated. The other big change is that the FAFSA used to take into account whether you had other siblings in college at the same time. So let's say you put in all your information and they've decided that your family can afford to spend $50,000 a year for college. So it used to be that if you were in college alone, then it was $50,000. But if you were in college and then your sister joined the next year, you'd do 25 and your sister would do 25. Now, for whatever reason, they've done away with that, and you'd have to do 50 and your sister would have to do 50. So in other words, if you have children back to back and you have multiple children who will be in college at the same time, this FAFSA change could be problematic. That being said, what many colleges are doing, they recognize the unfairness of this. So most private colleges, so Northeastern and BU and BC and all the Ivies and most of the other sort of higher ranked private colleges, they have a separate financial aid form called the CSS Profile, right? So this is something that's run by the College Board. This is a much more involved financial aid form. It really gets into the details of your financial life. It asks you what car you drive, how many miles it has on it, status of your mortgage. It really, really does quite a deep dive into your finances. And in that sense, it's much more difficult and much more of a pain to fill out, but it also gives a much more realistic picture. And that's what colleges typically use when making financial aid decisions. The CSS profile is already open, and it is something you can work on. Typically, financial aid deadlines are after the early deadline, so you should check with each individual college about when their deadlines are. But typically, if the deadline for the application is November 1st, the financial aid deadline might be November 15th or something like that. So essentially, as soon as you get over this hump of the early application, you need to really turn your attention to this financial aid. And that's true for most people, but if your family income is quite high, so if it's certainly if it's above $300,000 a year or even $250,000 a year, and there's a decent chance that you're not going to get financial aid and you will have to pay the full tuition, then this whole conversation is somewhat moot. But obviously, for most people, even if you're Hamzah doing fairly well, it's actually the people in the middle who are in most damaged by this. So if your family has an income in the 150 range, so Hamzah, you're doing okay. Obviously, that doesn't mean that you have unlimited resources, especially if you have multiple children and so on. And so the middle class is really getting squeezed. And so what's the strategy? How does it impact the strategy? It makes the decision of whether to apply early decision much more challenging, right? Because early decision, means that you're applying and it's a binding contract with the college. If I get in, then I will go. Now, there is some language in the early decision about financial aid, and if the financial aid package doesn't meet your demonstrated need, then you can get out of it. But that's a very, very rare, very unusual thing, and you need to prove that it doesn't meet your demonstrated need, and it's just not something you want to do. So what you need to do if you're considering applying early decision and you do need financial aid, then you should go to the net price calculator. So if you just Google the school that you're applying to, like Northeastern, net price calculator, and that will give an estimate. It will ask you questions about your financial situation, and it will estimate what your expected family contribution will be. Actually, now they call it the Student Aid Index. That's their new lingo in the new FAFSA. But essentially, they're going to tell you what your family might be on the hook to pay for. If that number blows your mind, or you're like, there's no way that can happen, then applying ED might not be the best option. Maybe you should be applying early action to some different schools, and then using the regular round to, inshallah, have a bunch of different acceptances and be able to compare financial aid packages from different schools. Financial aid is a big topic. I'm sure there will be some questions in the Q&A. Feel free to put questions in the chat as I'm speaking, and we can try to get to those later as well, but there will be plenty of time to ask questions at the end. Other things you can do. There are, if you Google, I should have put a link for it, but if you Google no loan colleges, there are a handful of colleges, maybe 15 or 20, that are committed to meeting 100% of your demonstrated financial need, and not, loans will not be a part of the financial aid package that you are offered. Those tend to be the most elite schools, Harvard and Princeton and various other schools, Williams and Amherst, Bowdoin, I believe, and a lot of very top universities and top liberal arts colleges are on that list. There are a few others that are maybe not quite as selective. The other way to deal with this is to get merit aid. So most of those top colleges do not give aid. Harvard does not give money on the basis of merit, right? Most of their students have a lot of merit, right? But some colleges will give money even to someone who could pay the full tuition. They will be trying to use their college scholarships, college merit money to attract students to that college who might have otherwise gone to another school. So that's, and again, you can look at lists of schools that on average give the most merit-based aid as well. And then use demographics to your advantage. So if you're from Boston, as many people are here, applying to schools only in New England, you're not going to get much of a demographic boost from that. However, if you're from the Northeast and you apply to schools in the South, or you apply to schools in the Midwest or Texas, right, then they don't see as many candidates like you, and they're more likely to try to attract you, possibly by sweetening the pot with the package and the financial package that they do. So if you're open to going to college outside of your immediately where you live and grow up, then that can be very beneficial. And there's a great video there that really goes into depth about these changes if you want to learn more. The third trend is the SAT is becoming digitized, and there are all sorts of questions about this test optional and the persistence of the test optional movement. So what has changed? So the SAT has always been pencil and paper, as I'm sure many of you went through it or have gone through it. It is becoming a digital test. They're going 100% digital as of the spring of 2024. The PSAT, which many of the 10th and 11th graders would have taken a couple weeks ago, is already digital, so they got a little taste of it. And the digital SAT is a little bit different in the sense that it's adaptive. So based on how you're doing on the initial questions, they will give you different questions. If you're getting most things right, then they're going to give you sort of harder questions going forward. And if you're getting quite a few of the things initially wrong, then they're going to give you easier questions. And obviously, ultimately, I mean, I'm sure it's very complicated, but this will impact your ultimate score and so on. So it is quite a big difference. Again, until we go through a few cycles about it, it's hard to say for sure exactly how it's going to impact things. The other big thing that happened, and this isn't just this year, but it's the last few years, during the pandemic, it was very difficult to take the SAT. It was very difficult to do anything in person. So almost all schools in the country became test optional, sort of against their will a lot of the time. But what happened as a result of that is the number of applications skyrocketed. So, a school that was getting 20,000 applications, it might double. They might get 40,000 applications, because it used to be that if a student's SAT score was well below the median score for the school, they wouldn't even consider applying there. Now, without that restriction in place, people just started applying to lots and lots of schools. Obviously that, more applications means the admissions rates have started going down. And it means, people just started doing this thing called shotgunning, where they just are applying to 15 or 20 different schools. They're just going on the Common App and finding schools and just sending applications out, which, it definitely has an impact, and we'll talk later how schools have dealt with that through supplements and some other things. It also means that the holistic review is more important than ever. Some schools are test blind, which means they don't see the scores, whether you can send them, they're not even going to look at them, they don't pay attention. And then other schools are what they call test aware, right? So if you send scores, then they will look at them. But if you don't send scores, then theoretically it does not impact your application. And in practice, at Al Noor, where I've been teaching, many of our students, I would say 80% of our students the last 2 years have not been submitting SAT scores, and alhamdulillah, they've gotten very good results, through the process. So it is definitely not a deal breaker to not send SAT scores. That being said, when you have a good SAT score, because fewer of them are being submitted, I think it carries maybe even more weight than it did before. Another impact of all this is the SAT scores at the schools are artificially inflated because only the students who are sort of in that top range are even submitting their scores. So there's been a lot of changes as a result of that. So strategy changes. If you want to take the traditional SAT that you've maybe been preparing for a long time, you only have a few more bites at the apple. These tests that are coming up later this winter, and I think there may be one or maybe two, I can't remember, in the spring, but there's only a very small number of tests of the old style that are coming up. The other thing I would say is, because you should look at the schools you want to apply to. There certainly are schools that are no longer test optional. I was looking at schools in Florida, and I would say the majority of schools in Florida are now requiring the SAT again, right? So you need to be careful. You need to look at the schools where you're applying. But if most of the schools are test optional, which is true here in New England, and you take the PSAT and you don't have a great score, you're scoring in 980 or something like that, and standardized test taking is not your strength, then I would say there is an argument to be made to not spend too much time worrying about it. I recommend that everyone takes the SAT at least once. It's sort of a rite of passage. You want to go through it. But if you take it and your score isn't great, and you know that could hold you back, then talk to your own guidance counselor, and so on. Don't make this decision in a vacuum. But I have been telling some of my students not to stress too much about it, because what a lot of parents do is they spend a lot of money and a lot of time, and the student goes from a 1050, and by the end they're up to like an 1180, and they still are not going to end up submitting that score to most of the schools or most of the top schools on their list, and so on. So that's how the calculus has sort of changed. And in terms of figuring out whether you should send your scores or not, you can find the data pretty easily online through these common data sets. I should say common data sets. And even if you just Google it, you can find, usually they report the 25th percentile score, the 50th, the median, and then 75th. If your score falls within that range or is above the 75th, absolutely send your score. If it doesn't, then you might consider not sending it. Again, this decision should be made in consultation with your own guidance counselor, or if you work with a private counselor or something like that. Okay. And all of these have these, for the people who have the link, have linked resources if you want to know more about it. I know this is getting a little on the long side, so we need to speed up a little bit. But the fourth trend, early admissions. Early admissions is more important than ever. Colleges are filling sometimes up to 70%, on average 40 to 60% of their class through early admissions, especially early decision, the binding application. So you can imagine how important that is. If 50% of the seats are going to be taken during that early round, that's something you might want to get in. Some schools, their admissions rates at the early round are 20% acceptance, and at the regular round are 5% acceptance. So missing out on that can be challenging. Of course, the other thing is that a lot of schools that used to be early action have switched to being early decision, and as I said before, with the financial aid changes, that makes things difficult. There's also restrictive early action, which is not a binding decision, but it means you cannot apply to other private schools. That's what Harvard does, for example. Princeton, Stanford, Yale, schools like that. They don't want you to apply. They're not going to force you to go there if you get in, but they don't want you to be applying to other private schools and ED to another school, and so on. What's the impact for Muslims? The rec letters and essays are more critical than ever. So they're really doing this holistic review of the early applicants. They're trying to see who you really are, and it comes through in these documents. ED is a very, very powerful tool and potent thing, and it's a huge part of your strategy, whether you do choose to do ED. It's you won't. There's also ED2, which is another thing we could talk about, which is at the regular deadline, where you can also, again, make one school be a binding decision. FAFSA, like I said before, is making the calculus, should I apply ED, even harder this year. AI, I could have done a whole trend on AI. Obviously, the explosion of artificial intelligence has complicated this picture. I'm sure there will be some students who just write a pure ChatGPT essay, and I'm sure that many colleges, as soon as they detect that, won't even look at the rest of the application and will immediately reject it, right? Is that to say that you should not ever consult ChatGPT? I'm actually quite a big evangelist for the value of AI within education. I think you can do some amazing brainstorming with artificial intelligence. The activities section is, really helpful to, describe the activity and get some ideas. It's just with the writing itself, right? When you're writing your essay, when you're writing your personal statement, it needs to be in your voice, right? You could do some brainstorming, you could ask it some questions, you can use it in very sophisticated ways to get some ideas, but when you go to sit down to write it, make sure it's in your own voice, because anything, like my personal AI detector is pretty strong. When students submit their brag sheets, some of them, the whole thing is AI and it has no life to it, and it's just so obvious that they didn't write it, right? And so people who read a lot of these things, they're very sophisticated, so just be very careful around that. There are some reasons not to apply early. If your 11th grade year did not go that well, and you really need to show them that you're doing much better your 12th grade year, then it would be better not to apply early and to do really well in your fall classes, because when you apply during the regular deadline, they see, how that first semester went in the fall. The other thing I would say is most of you will be applying to maybe one of your top schools ED, or maybe you have a few of your high-ranked schools early action, but then you probably have a bunch of safeties on your list that you want to just apply to them early action. And once you have your personal statement done, most of those schools, they don't even have a fee, like an application fee. They don't have supplements. You should just apply to them. It's good for your peace of mind. Inshallah, you'll get into some schools. You'll know you have a place to go in December. And also their financial aid budgets are more full at this point, and so on. And there's a great resource there with that grid. Finally, supplements. Okay, so supplements have changed a lot. 70% of colleges changed something about the way their supplements work. So what supplements are their extra essays that are specific to colleges, right? So you apply and you do your personal statement, your Common App essay, but then they have extra essays which they give to their students. And the reason they do this is to see how serious you are about applying to that school. One of the classic questions is like, why Tufts? Why BU? Like, why do you specifically do you want to come here? Which is actually quite a tricky question to answer in a good way. But then they have other questions, and mainly what they're trying to see is, how seriously are you taking this application? They know that your Common App essay is probably going to be heavily workshopped and heavily edited and so on. But with the supplements, when you have a whole bunch of them, you're not going to be able to get that much help on all of them. They'll think it's a more authentic piece of writing, and they'll know that you did that writing specifically for them. So if you put a lot of effort in it, it will really stand out. And if you just sort of mail it in and don't do a great job or do that whole AI thing, then that's going to really hurt you. At some point in your application, whether it's in your personal statement or not, as we said before with the affirmative action decision, it does make sense to share, at least subtly, something about your ethnic and religious background. Colleges really want to maintain diversity. They're worried about the affirmative action case, They are very committed. They tend to be much more liberal than the Supreme Court justices, and they really are committed to having diverse campuses. So it will, inshallah, it will not hurt you as long as you don't do it in a very dogmatic kind of way and so on. Supplements are often even more important than personal statements at these highly selective colleges, as I said, because you're doing it just for them. So typically what happens is, again, one or two of the schools that you apply to early have supplements. You're still writing your personal statement, you're a little bit stressed. The early application round is nothing compared to the regular application round, right? Because typically, obviously, if you get an ED and you're done December 15th, alhamdulillah, you're lucky, and inshallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have that happen for you. But for many people that don't know or don't yet have a top option, they're going to be applying to 10 schools or more that all have supplements. So suddenly you go from having to write maybe a small handful of supplements at the early round to having to write literally 25 different little mini essays, and so on. So it's incredibly important to create a supplement tracker. There's a link for that there, where you organize in one place all the supplements, how many words they are, and so on, and so on. And then there's some other resources. So we recognize this issue here at Phi Before College, and we want to try to address this. Winter break for me of my senior year was the single most stressful time in my entire life, and I was only applying to 6 colleges. But still, it was just an intensely stressful time, because a lot of students, they don't get serious about the regular deadline until winter break comes, and it's December 21st, and so on. And so if you're a senior and you're anticipating a lot of early rounds, you really need to start as soon as you get over this the hump of November 1st, take a week off, relax, and so on, and then get right back to it. فَإِذَا فَرَغْتَ فَانْصَبْ. Okay, so we're going to be offering a 5-week masterclass starting November 20th and finishing right there at the beginning or before your winter break, so that inshallah you can be done or almost done with your supplements and have that winter break back. It is going to be taught by Dina, who's the other one on camera now. She's a 2-time MIT graduate, and so on. Dina, could you briefly mention how you're planning to teach the course?
Yeah, so this course is going to be a mix of like instruction, so like teaching strategies and common mistakes, etc., and also workshopping. So it'll be taught on Monday and Thursday for 5 weeks. The Monday class is a teaching class, and the Thursday class is a workshopping class where a couple students each week get to have their essays workshopped, like with a focus on them on like different students each week. So we're really excited about that, because not only will you have some tips that you can use to make your supplements better that you can use across all of them, but for at least some of your supplements you will also have concrete feedback from myself and also some of your peers.
I don't know what just happened. I must have opened something. Jazakallah khair. And let me quickly get back to that slide. If you haven't seen Dina's supplements, again, they're in that link. I know, which again was in your email and has been shared several times. Mashallah, Dina's supplements for MIT were among the best supplements I've ever seen. We did a whole webinar where we went through them. That's out there on the website and so on. And inshallah, we haven't launched this yet, but there is a link to pre-register. I just put it in the chat. So if you think this is something that sounds interesting, that you might be interested in, please, just go through that. It's a very quick little form, just to give us a sense of, how many people might be interested in this, and also start letting people know. We will be doing more as we flesh out all the details of the class, and we'll let people know. In terms of what's available now, especially in this last week and so on, there's one-on-one college counseling, college coaching, I prefer to call it, right? So these, what could you do during these sessions, especially for the seniors going through this? finalizing your college lists. Okay, sometimes, colleges get added at the very last second that end up being your home for 4 years. And if you've never talked to someone who really knows the situation around different colleges, it can make a huge difference to add 1 or 2 colleges or change your strategy. Early strategy, we talked a lot about this. Do I apply ED? Do I not? It often requires a conversation. Financial aid, right? Figuring out how to do figure out your expected family contribution, net price calculators, that sort of thing. Obviously, hopefully you've done a lot of brainstorming, but maybe some people, they need the deadline pressure to perform. So they're still in that idea phase. But certainly people need help fine-tuning their essays. And you can book with me here, but you can also book with Dina. I think we'll get her link and I'll include it this. So Dina obviously has some advantages that I don't have for when she's female, mashallah. She also is an MIT grad and a very much a STEM person, computer science and data analytics and that kind of background, which is quite different than my background. And she also is quite a bit younger than I am, so she's much closer to the process herself, and so she can be really great, especially if you have similar things to that, and so on. So that's those are things that you can do here, and so on. And Hamza, we've finally gotten to the Q&A portion. So pretty much if you just raise your digital hand if you want to speak, then we can then you can unmute yourself and ask your question. I think some questions have also been shared in the chat, which we will also try to get to. And I know we ran a little bit longer than I had hoped, but I will stay here as long as necessary. And obviously you feel free to drop whenever you wish, but oftentimes the Q&A is the most interesting part of a lot of these different things. So without further ado, questions. I'm going to stop sharing so we can do that. There have been some questions in the chat. Have there been questions in the chat?
No, just people like mentioning who they are, and then I made some like comments and added the link.
Okay, cool. I'm sure people have questions around some of these things. Don't be shy. You can either type it in the chat or doing this. What's the logic of doing it with the sibling discount? That is a good question for our Republican Congress. They're the ones who pushed this through. The only thing that I've heard on it, I think some people said they didn't really read the bill when they did it, and now they regret it. That's one thing I've heard. The other thing I've heard is that it's all about taking personal responsibility, and people should plan ahead. And if they know this is going to be an issue, then they should space out their children, so that they're not in school at the same time. And if they didn't do that, then that's their own fault, and the government shouldn't be bailing people out. That's pretty much the talking point that they've heard. I don't see a lot of logic in it. Like I said, I think colleges also recognize how unfair that is, especially if let's say you're in college now with a freshman and a junior or something, and then next year suddenly things change. Colleges know that, and they're going to try to work with you. That's why the CSS profile is so important, inshallah. Does early action have an impact to doing regular decision to the same college? So when you apply early decision, that is the strongest signal you can have to a college that you are serious about it, that they are your top choice. It's easy to say that with words, right? But I've seen people where they tell every college they're applying to, you're my top choice. When you apply ED and you go into this financial contract with the school saying, if I get in, I will go there, then you've put your you put yourself on the line. So If you apply early decision or early action, there are essentially three different things that can happen. Either you can get accepted, alhamdulillah, you can get rejected, which while it stings is at least better to know. And you know, if you get rejected in the early round, you cannot apply again during the regular round. You could eventually transfer to that school potentially, or something like that, but essentially you're done for that year. Or you can get deferred. So what deferred means is you get your application gets pushed from the early round to the regular round, and you're not going to find out the decision until March when you know they give their decisions for the regular round. That's what happened to me. I applied early to Harvard. I got deferred, and then I got waitlisted, which is like the regular round version of getting deferred. And then ultimately I got something called Z-listed, which means I wasn't accepted into the current class, but I was accepted into the following year's class. So I took a very circuitous route there, and so on. Let's see. I think that hopefully that answered that question. Yeah, you want to say something?
Oh, I was just gonna. I thought you were searching for the next question. I was just gonna read it.
Okay. So advantages of applying through Questbridge. So Questbridge is a great program. If there are any juniors here, I highly recommend you check it out. There are requirements, however. Essentially, it is for exceptional students, exceptional college candidates who also are from less privileged financial backgrounds. Those are the two sort of twin things that you sort of need to be a good Questbridge applicant. There are not hard and fast cutoffs for either of those things, but those are among the things that they look at. When you apply to Questbridge, essentially, it's quite a burdensome process of extra essays. It's a little bit longer and so on, and you need to become a Questbridge finalist and so on. I know we actually have, I think there are some people here maybe who are going through the process who could speak to it if they wanted to themselves. But then what you do is you match schools, right? So you have a list of, I don't know how many schools it can be, 10 schools, maybe even more, that you match those schools, that you rank those schools. So let's say Brown is my top choice, and then you know, BC, and then Tufts, and you know, and all the way down. Not all schools are on Questbridge, but for the schools that are. And then the schools, when they read the applications, they rank the students, right? Or and they choose the students, and then if those things match, right? So if your top choice school, you know, mentions you, then that's a match, and then that's how you get acceptance. One of the big challenges with Questbridge, like I was saying about the regular deadline and having tons of supplements to write, if you're applying through Questbridge, you have to do all those supplements for all those schools early. It is a way, however, to apply quite early in the process to a very, very competitive list of schools. It is a tried and true pipeline for especially underprivileged students to get into really top universities. So if you qualify, I highly recommend you do it. Highly recommend your guidance counselor recommend you for it, and so on. Yep.
So one like advantage, which you know I think makes the process of applying to Questbridge worth it, is that the Questbridge acceptance process like is quite rigorous and quite difficult. And so if you get into something that's already selective, and this is the case with other things such as like summer programs or whatever, like anytime you get into something selective, it makes it easier to get into additional selective things such as colleges, because you've like the people who see your college application know that you have applied to other things and other admissions groups have already liked you. So that's one thing. And then just to add some details, at least for this current year, these they mentioned that these are not super hard cutoffs, but generally Questbridge scholars tend to be people who have an expected family contribution of 0, which means like people who should be able to get a full ride to college based on their family need. And for this year, their website says that translates to a household income around or under $65,000. But that can be like different depending on siblings and stuff. So if you think you qualify, you should still. I mean, I think the cycle is done this year. Yeah, it is done this year. But like for next year, you should still check when it updates and also apply anyway if you're close. And then in terms of being in the top of your class, they say that you should be approximately in the top 10% of your class. But you know, if for example you go to Anur and the class is 10 people, you should still apply even if you're not the top one. So there's a little bit of flexibility there, but those are some rough guidelines so that people watching now as juniors have a sense of if they will be able to apply next year.
Right. So to be clear, anyone can apply, but those are, they definitely are looking for those people. I wouldn't get too caught up on the $65,000 number, because people's financial situations can be complicated, especially with Muslims with very large families. All I can say is the students who I've had who have been Questbridge finalists have gone on to very, very, excellent schools. So if you're able to do that, it's a great thing to do. Let's see. Did you say that top schools like Harvard don't want you to apply to multiple top colleges at the same time, or I misunderstood that? Yep. So Harvard in particular is something their early plan is called restrictive early action. So essentially what that means is you can apply early to Harvard, and if you're not bound to go there. You can still apply to other schools at the regular deadline and compare financial packages and all that other stuff. However, you cannot apply to any other private universities. So you can apply early to Harvard, and then you could apply, if you're a Massachusetts resident, to UMass and UMass Boston, UMass Amherst, public universities you can apply to, but you can't apply to any other private institutions. And essentially, it's the reason they do that is because they're very concerned about their yield, right? Yield is the number of students that they accept versus the number of students who actually enroll. So a school like Harvard has a very high yield, something like 80% or something. So 80% of the students that they accept end up enrolling. Whereas a much less selective school might have a yield of 10%, right? They have to admit a huge number of students in order to fill their classes and so on. So if you were allowed to apply ED to another school and you were a strong enough student to potentially get into Harvard early, then their yield would get all messed up because they'd be accepting people who would, be bound to go to other schools and so on. And that's probably one of the reasons they have that policy. There's only a handful of schools that can afford to have that policy. Because and those really are the very top schools, the Princetons and the Stanfords and schools like that. Let's see. I'm seeing some direct messages.
Yeah, I also have one.
Do you want to go with your direct message first then? I need to read this one.
Sure. Yeah. I have one that says, are there any grants or like scholarships students can apply for to like help with tuition?
Do you want to talk about that, or
Oh,
I'm
sure.
I'm happy to. But
So basically, the way that so Brother Hamzah spoke earlier about the FAFSA, which is a very general way of determining how much your family should be expected to contribute towards college education. And that is something that you typically send to every school that you apply to in order for them to get a financial picture and make an offer to you. In addition to that, which Brother Hamzah also mentioned, there is the CSS profile, which not all schools have, but some of the more selective schools, which may be able to meet more of your need, will often have. So those things are things where you will get a different number from different schools. And let's say that you get a very good financial aid offer from school A, but you want to go to school B. You can't take the money that school A was going to offer you and pay it towards school B. for those things. And then for like less selective schools, you can also receive merit-based scholarships that are also specific to the school. Outside of things that are specific to the school, which are mostly what Brother Hamzah already went over, there are lots of scholarships where you can do something, typically a piece of writing or some other type of competition, and then a select number of people are awarded an amount of money that they can pay toward their tuition regardless of the school that they go to. A very famous example of this is Bill Gates has a very big scholarship. There are some big corporations that have very famous scholarships that are typically tied to some competition. There are also scholarships that are usually focused at various groups of people, so racial, ethnic, or religious groups. There are also some scholarships that are directed specifically at women, and so this is something that you can search for, and I think Brother Hamzah is also copying some links into the chat. So if you are able to find scholarships that are specifically for women going into STEM, or specifically for Muslims who are first-generation college students, things like that, those are some of the scholarships. They're not like the ones hosted by big corporations where there are tons and tons of applicants and they maybe have a bigger prize, but those ones, they may have a smaller financial prize, but they're also typically a little bit easier to win because they're more focused. So in general, these things will have a piece of writing or some sort of competitive thing that you have to do, and then they will have a set of winners that receive money that can go toward whichever college they choose.
Right. I was doing it from memory, so I hope those links work. But there are some clearinghouse sites that try to collate all sorts of different scholarship opportunities and put them in one place, and then they're searchable things where you can put in stuff about your background, like Dina was saying, if you're a female or female in STEM, or South Asian, or whatever unique characteristics you have, there may be scholarships specifically for you. There's scholarships at different ages, so even students who are younger and so on. In my experience with this, I have told students about scholarships many times, but only a small handful of them actually go through with the application process, because they see they have to write an essay and they're like, subhanAllah, and they just don't do it. And then that small number of sort of go-getters actually goes out, they see an opportunity, they put in the relatively short period of time, but they go through that short-term pain. And then, they forget about it. And a few months later, this money starts coming in, right? If you get in the habit, once you've written a personal statement and you've gotten over the fear barrier about writing about yourself and so on, it can really help you to apply for scholarships. There is a bit of a caveat that some schools will reduce your financial aid package based on the amount of money that you get with your scholarships, which doesn't seem very fair to me, and it doesn't always work exactly that way. But yeah, these are some different things to look at. Someone wrote about how they grew up in Canada with immigrant parents. They went to this university in the city that they grew up with, and then I think the question is, what do you recommend? Should Muslim students sort of go to college close to home, live at home, continue with that, or should they go on more of a grand adventure type thing where they go to a school maybe in a different city or further from home and they're living on campus and so on? That's a big question. There's not a single answer for it. Students are all different, and I think I cannot imagine my college experience having been as rich as it was if I had been living at home and commuting, which I technically could have done. I grew up in Dedham and was going to school in Cambridge. I could have been driving every day. But so much of the college experience and the networking and the socializing and the Muslim events and everything happen in the evenings and study groups and late nights in the library and so on. I can't imagine that, and so on. Obviously, there are some schools that are mostly commuter schools. UMass Boston, the vast majority of the students are commuting there. If you go to a school like that, or MCP or Suffolk, or a lot of these more urban schools, where many of their students are from local areas, then that's the norm, and you won't be missing out on as much. But if you go to a school where 95% of the students are residential and you're not, you are commuting, you will probably feel like you miss out on some things. The other part of it is, obviously, as Muslims, like, parents have a pretty good sense of their children. Some people have developed a really strong foundation within the deen. And when they go, college is a very difficult place to maintain your iman. The arrows of shaitan are all over the place in college, so it is definitely a concern, especially for a student who's more of a follower, and so on. That being said, if the brother who introduced me to Islam, if his parents had not sent him to a boarding school where he went and he like had the fikr of da'wah and so on, and he called the adhan, and he made wudu in the bathrooms publicly, and so on, and helped me and others learn about Islam, Allahu alam, Allah knows best. So if you go to college with that niyyah of da'wah, and you go to the college intending to maintain your deen, you can have a transformative impact on that campus, right? And so it's a complicated question, definitely something to be talked about with the parents, and maybe with a counselor as well, because every student is different. I don't know if do you have thoughts on that, Dina?
I mean, just maybe like some slight pushback about the point about dawah. Like, I think it is very easy to think when you're surrounded by people who encourage you to do good, and you yourself are in the habit of doing a lot of good, to feel like when you get to college you will be the one influencing rather than the one being influenced. But that oftentimes isn't the case, and it is very important to enter that experience with humility, and like always be worried about yourself, and like make lots of dua that like whatever you choose and whoever you encounter, that Allah first and foremost like preserves and increases the iman that you have, and then if possible also allows you to share it with others, and then on top of the sort of personal decision about your own maturity and your own like religious place, it is another thing to consider if you do have the option, and if you do go to a school that has a significant portion of commuters, that it is also a big financial decision. So the college experience, is very exciting, especially if that's something that is like if you go to a school where a lot of people live there, but and it can teach you so many valuable lessons about independence and really like help you enter like proper adulthood. However, if you are able to stay at home and if you feel like that's a better fit for you, it will save you tens of thousands of dollars over the years, and that's definitely something that you shouldn't take lightly either.
Right. Obviously, financial aid, depending on your situation, can cover some of the housing costs as well. But 100%, I would say, compared to other groups, more Muslims do live at home than almost any other group that's out there, because mashallah, the family ties are so strong, and so on. It's a big decision, and it's definitely a great thing to think about and talk about together. Some students are afraid to even bring something like that up with their parents. So I just would suggest that you have a proper adult conversation about it. There are so many different factors, financial, social, religious, etc., and that kind of decision. Same thing with the idea of going to community college. The least expensive way typically to go to college would be to do the first 2 years at community college and then transfer to a 4-year institution, right? And within the Muslim community, which is unfortunately a lot of elitism has sort of seeped into it, it's all about the status of the university that you go to. There is nothing wrong with going that other path. Ultimately, where you go to college has some impact on early in your career, And obviously the very, very top colleges carry a certain weight with them, that lasts a lifetime. However, in pretty much in your professional life, it's really going to come down to your work experience and how you are on the job. Most of the training that you're getting is on the job and so on. So I think we need to really take the status seeking and really take it down a notch, within the Muslim community. All right. What? Okay. What's the recommendation? This is another private message, for SAT digital versus paper for juniors. I think you might as well take a paper test because that's the only thing you've ever done before, and you probably practiced for it, and it's your last chance. There's going to be the digital option in the future. So I would suggest, especially if you've never taken the paper one, to try to actually try it out and see how it goes. Ultimately, once they make the change, I think, it's going to be sort of the same for everyone. And I'm sure a whole new test prep industry is going to explode around preparing people for the digital test and so on. Khan Academy has free SAT test prep that is also adaptive, based on you sort of upload your SAT or your College Board account, and it will see how you did on the PSAT, and it will design a study schedule for you. And now Khan Academy's done some amazing things with artificial intelligence. They have this thing called Khan Migo, and it can do lots of really cool stuff. Listen to the TED talk that Sal Khan gave, and it's amazing. What are the top colleges for pharmacy in Massachusetts other than MCPHS? There are a lot of different places that you can go. Typically, people do pharmacy more as a graduate degree. One of our wonderful students at Elnor went to Northeastern, and then she pursued pharmacy from Northeastern. There are definitely other schools. MCP, is which is Mass College of Health and Pharmacy and Health Sciences. It's an interesting, it's a school. I don't know if I should express my personal opinions about schools. It's a school that does not really have a campus or like a college culture. It's a school you go to, you take your classes, and you leave. And so most students don't like rave about the MCP experience. That being said, when you look at salary data, people, because they're preparing people for the health services fields, they do tend to, 10 years out, the average MCP student is making more than the average Harvard student. That's some of the data that came out. Now, 20 years out, it changes quite a bit. But there are pros and cons to schools like that. And there are a lot of other pharmacy tracks and things. What is it with so many colleges saying first and second year students are required to dorm? Do they all allow applications for commuter status? So like I said, colleges also recognize if they are a residential college, what you miss out on by not being on campus, and so they may have policies that insist for you to dorm. There often are ways for you to get out of that you can petition, you can have a letter from the imam and things like that. So there are students that I've worked with before who have gotten into a school that required them to dorm, and they've managed to get out of that requirement, for better or worse. And then other schools, they have policies like if you live within a certain radius of the school, then you're allowed to commute and so on. It's always something that's open for negotiation. It's worth a conversation. I wouldn't use it, like the fear about that, like having to possibly live there, as a reason to not apply to the school. Like, don't close doors before they're open for you. What's MIT's policy around dorming?
I believe that first year it is required.
Mm-hmm. And did you live there all your years?
Yeah. I think you kind of like have to in order to keep up, just because like at least in my case, like I was attending like office hours or tutoring sessions like at night to a point where I think it would have been a bigger danger for me to be like taking the train back home at that time rather than just going back to my dorm.
Mashallah. So any guidance or resource for applying to UK-based colleges, Cambridge, Oxford, etc.? Also, what is the current status for legacy kids in the US? Definitely applying to schools outside of the country, Canada, UK, Europe, sometimes is definitely something that you can explore. It's not an area that I have particular expertise in, and I haven't done as much. I know people who have more of a specialty in that field, and I also know quite a few people who have studied overseas in those places. I think it can be definitely an interesting experience. A lot of schools have study abroad programs where you can spend a semester or a year. That's where I first went to Egypt through study abroad and so on. So you can get that international experience. Some countries, like if you wanted to go to school in Germany or somewhere like that, they have essentially no tuition, which is obviously great, but it's also in German, which might be a bit of a challenge. Legacy students. So the Supreme Court did away with affirmative action, but they did not yet touch legacy status. So if legacy means that if you had a sibling or a parent or a grandparent who went to that school, then some colleges will give you an advantage and will put you in a different applicant pool, and essentially your chances of getting in are higher. So schools do that, for a variety of reasons. Obviously, certain families, if they keep on sending kids to these elite schools, tend to be pretty financially well off. College is a business after all, so they're trying to keep their coffers filled and so on. So that's one reason. I think that this policy is really under quite a lot of scrutiny right now, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's another case that gets up to the Supreme Court level and so on. It's just, yeah, there are a lot of things that are unfair in the college process, and doing away with the race-based thing first, I don't know. I don't need to share my own personal views here, but it doesn't always seem to make the most sense or be the most fair way of doing it. I think socioeconomic status is something that schools could really look at, and trying to really have diversity from people in the lowest 20th percentile, which is hugely underrepresented on college campuses, and that's where you can have significantly transformative effect for their own communities and so on. And having some sort of an affirmative action type program for students like that, I think would make a lot of sense. But anyway, Dawah also requires practice, 100%, alhamdulillah. One of my teachers used to say the best defense is a strong offense. Like, in other words, if you're not da'i, you're mad'u. Like, if you're not calling towards Allah, then you're being called away from him. But like Dina was saying, that's easier said than done. But certainly a lot of international students, interestingly, who grew up in Muslim countries and sort of took Islam for granted, when they get to college and they see like the fitna and fasad, it's like so stark, the difference. You go out on a weekend night and like half the people are going to the bar, and then like there are other people going to pray tahajjud or tarawih and so on. Like, it's so stark, and they end up actually becoming stronger in their deen here in the States. I've seen this happen again and again. Things are sort of all mixed up back in the home countries. Here it's really clear, and they gravitate towards the deen. So college can be a time of enormous spiritual growth for someone who has never really been independent, and then they get there and they get attached to the MSA. Maybe there's a great Muslim chaplain, and they just really extend themselves, and they can grow a lot as Muslims and so on. Do some colleges require freshmen to dorm on campus? Is it mandatory? Yep, so that's sort of what we've been talking about. Some schools do. It sounds like MIT, I know Harvard did, Brown. So typically, you know, the more selective colleges, the more prestigious colleges, the colleges which are almost 100% residential, they might have that requirement. Like we were saying though, there you know, they can make exceptions. You can petition and provide reasons. People have used like notes from imams and other things, but it's something to think about. There's a reason the colleges want you to be there on campus. How do things like scholarships and American college apps affect an application to college abroad? Huh, that's an interesting question. I mean, so if I understand correctly, I mean, so most American colleges use the Common App, which is a single application that you use for many different colleges. There are colleges like MIT and others that are not on the Common App that have their own separate applications. The UC system is another one like that. But then international schools, you know, have their own systems of application, and so like there may be some overlap between the essays and stuff that you write here for the states and those schools, but they would have their own systems and so on. Yeah, I don't know if I answered that well. How is the college system set up than high school? Like high school has a different classes for every subject. What about college? Is it the same? Okay, so that's a good question. How are classes set up in college and so on? There's not, colleges are not a monolith. The way colleges distinguish themselves from one another is based on questions like this. You know, some colleges are very special, you know, like Babson and Bentley are business focused colleges. Most of the courses you know, revolve around that subject. Other colleges are, you know, have, you know, the, you know, Olin School of Engineering, right? You're probably not going to go there to do creative writing and so on. You know, then there are liberal arts colleges which have a really broad curriculum, and you know, they might have core requirements where you need to take you know, classes in different disciplines and so on. You know, typically the way it works is usually after your sophomore year, you declare your major. And so you're going to take quite a few classes that are connected to whatever it is that you're choosing to major in. And then there's double majoring and minoring and so on. I don't know, do you want to talk about that at all? Like how the classes were set up at MIT in particular, maybe?
Yeah, so we have GIRs, which are General Institute requirements, or which are basically gen ed, so they're like classes everyone has to take. We have 6 of them in the like science and math areas, namely biology, chemistry, physics 1, classical mechanics, physics 2, electricity and magnetism, single variable calculus, and multivariable calculus. And then you have to take 8 humanities classes with a couple specific requirements, such as like you have to take 1 social science and 1 art, and you have to take at least 3 classes in the same humanities subject. So there's kind of a pretty big space of requirements to make sure that your education is broad enough, regardless of what you major in. People typically take about 4 classes per semester, so that's another way it's different from high school. Whereas in high school, you're maybe in 7 or 8 subjects at a time, and you have a smaller commitment per week or per day to those subjects. You typically take around like between 3 and 5 classes per semester in college, usually about 4. And then earlier on, people usually take more general classes, and then as they get into later years, they'll take classes that are more specific to their major. Is that helpful? Okay.
Right, and most colleges have, like, if you look at the name of the class, so there's like Bio 101, right? That's going to be the basic introduction to biology class. And so that first number can indicate, typically the 100 level classes are freshman classes, 200 level classes are sophomore classes. It doesn't always work out that way. We have all North students taking 200 level classes who obviously aren't even in college yet. But typically the higher that first number, sort of the more advanced and sophisticated, there are courses that are designed for graduate students. One of the first class I took a class called Islamic Philosophy and Theology my freshman fall at Harvard, and I got in there and I was like one of two undergrads. The rest of the people were, you know, in this particular field and were essentially experts, and I was totally out of my element and so on. So, you know, different things like that, happen. But I definitely think college is a great time. And if you're, you know, if you're younger or if you're thinking of how to sell yourself, a lot of Muslims just say, I'm pre-med, I'm going to do biology, I'm going to do engineering, I'm going to do, there's a few really popular subjects. And of course, if that's where your aptitude lies, and, you know, you come from a family of doctors and so on, and it's very likely that you'll go in that path, definitely, if you're a competitive engineering candidate, you've done a lot of physics and so on, by all means do that. But a lot of really successful people major in things like philosophy, right? These subjects which you don't really associate with success, or you're like, oh, that person could just become a teacher. Actually, no, they became the CEO of a company and so on because they were trained to think in a different kind of way. And having like multiple majors, like let's say you're an expert in computer science and in Latin and Greek, right? That's an interesting profile when you're applying to college and you have these like two things that seem to not match, and then you're able to make connections between those things. Some people feel boxed in by saying, am I a STEM person or am I a humanities person? I'm a computer science poet, right? People have different identities, and it's good to celebrate. And oftentimes, the more distinct and unique those things are, the more insight that you're able to bring into one discipline, right? So your computer science background can inform your poetry and vice versa, right? So it's really good to have multiple interests on different paths, and don't just try to blend in and look like all the other kids, right? The center of the herd might be very comfortable, but the view is terrible, right? Standing right in the middle of the pack is just not the way to stand out. You're just going to be in the gray area. You're going to look like every other kid. And that's why, Hamza, being a Muslim and, in the country now, it's okay to talk about that. You don't, most likely you don't stand out if you're waking up at 4 a.m. in the summer to pray Fajr and something like that. That's very, very different priorities than what other people have. And you have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your life and things like that. So alhamdulillah. I'm not seeing many more questions in my chat. Do you have any in yours, Dina?
No, that was the last one I got as a direct message as well.
Anyone want to bravely speak and ask a question, or are you guys all pretty much done? Like I said, we are here. You should have my email, and we will send out a recording of this and a copy of the slides. Like I said, the slides have links to all sorts of things, including the way to book meetings and stuff like that, and lots of resources about all the things that we talked about today. Hope this was helpful. If you're a senior, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this next week possible. Inshallah, you will get through it. This too shall pass. And some people, they need the deadline pressure to perform. I fall into that category as much as I try to fight against it. So if you're feeling like I'm way behind or I'm totally, there is still a week, right? There is still a week, and you're gonna be okay, inshallah. But like I said, the regular deadline, don't do that, because it's even worse, and so on. But everyone's gonna be fine, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. So thank you so much for everything. It was wonderful to have so many people here and spend all this time together. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Alaikum assalam. by someone's thanking you in my direct message. So
Thank you.
thank you, mashallah. Future college student. Alhamdulillah.
You should stop the recording.
Oh yeah. As I always